Morning, all. All right, so now we're ready to take a look at the 1931-1932 season. The first thing you'll notice is that we're down to 8 teams. We've got 2 teams that are not playing this season. The Senators withdraw for financial reasons, and they would be back a year later. The Quakers, though, they withdraw for the year, but they end up folding. They don't return. So the Philadelphia Quakers, 1 season and gone. The Montreal Canadiens finish first overall that year. They do not win the Stanley Cup, so again, President's Trophy curse. 25-16-7, 57 points. They're coached by Cecil Hart at that point. The Toronto Maple Leafs, 23-18-7, 53 points, playing out of Maple Leaf Gardens, which seats 12,473 fans, coached by Art Duncan and Dick Irvin. The Montreal Maroons, 19-22-7, 45 points. Sprague Cleghorn, their coach. The New York Americans, 16-24-8, 40 points. Their coach is Eddie Girard at this stage. So that's your Canadian division. The American division, led by the New York Rangers, 23-17-8, 54 points. They're coached by Lester Patrick. The Chicago Blackhawks, 18-19-11 for 47 points. Their coach, they have 2 of them actually, Emil Iverson and Godfrey Matheson. The Detroit Falcons, 18-20-10 record, 46 points. They're coached by Jack Adams. The Boston Bruins, 15-21-12, 42 points. Art Ross is their coach. They're playing out of Boston, Madison Square Garden. Yeah, becomes just the Boston Garden, right? 13,909 fans are the capacity for that arena. So it's not the Boston Garden they would end up in, but Boston, Madison Square Garden just sounds so weird. But anyways, those are your standings. The Boston Bruins, as you can see, falling off. The New York Americans being at the bottom of their division. And, of course, just 8 teams rather than 10. November 12th of 1931, the Maple Leafs opened Maple Leaf Gardens. It was a 2-1 loss to Chicago that opened that building. September 26th, 1931, the dispersal draft happens. So if you're wondering what happened with Ottawa and Philadelphia players, they were picked up by all the rest of the teams in the league. And probably something that those teams were greatly happy to have during this really tough financial time for the National Hockey League. January 23rd of 1932, Alex Connell records his 67th career shutout, which was an NHL record at the time. February 6th of 1932, the Leafs' Charlie Conacher sets a record scoring 7 seconds into a game against Boston. The Leafs won that game 6-0. So that early goal was telling you it was going to be a rough night for the Boston Bruins. The Falcons go bankrupt, but they stay on the ice. They still employ their players, but they go into receivership. The AHL affiliate, that becomes a thing this year as well. The AHL signs an agreement with the National Hockey League to officially become the feeder system through which the NHL picks up its players and develops them and all that. Your first team All-Stars that season, and there were first team All-Stars for yesterday. I just didn't have them on the board. I apologize. But your first team All-Stars, Howie Morenz, first team All-Star for Montreal. Right wing, Bill Cook from the New York Rangers. Left wing, Busher Jackson from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Defenseman, Ching Johnson from the Rangers and Eddie Shore from the Boston Bruins. And Charlie Gardner of the Chicago Blackhawks in goal. Eddie Shore had some trade interest that year, but there was a belief that the Boston Bruins would not listen to any kind of trade talks with Eddie Shore because they desperately needed him. They were at the bottom of the league, and they needed him to avoid getting worse. Second team All-Stars, Hooley Smith for the Montreal Maroons is your second team center. Charlie Conacher on the right wing for Toronto. Aurel Julia for the Montreal Canadiens on the left side. King Clancy on the defense from Toronto. And Silvio Mantha for Montreal on defense. And in goal, Roy Werders for the New York Americans. Well, the Americans have the worst points in the league at 40. Roy Werders is doing everything he can to try to keep them from having a much worse record. And he's an excellent goaltender who's in New York playing for the Americans, a team that does have its struggles. So your Hart Trophy winner that year is Howie Morenz for the Montreal Canadiens. Vezina winner Charlie Gardner for the Chicago Blackhawks. And the Lady Byng goes to Joe Primo of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So somebody other than Frank Boucher winning the Lady Byng that season. Busher Jackson was the leading scorer that year, but we do not have an Art Ross trophy. He's out of Toronto, 48 games, 28 goals, 25 assists, 53 points. So you can see the NHL expanded to a 48-game season. Joe Primo for Toronto, 46 games, 13 goals, 37 assists, 50 points. Howie Morenz, 48 games, 24 goals, 25 assists, 49 points. Charlie Conacher for Toronto. So that entire kid line, 3 of the top 4 scorers in the NHL, 44 games, 34 goals, 14 assists for 48 points. Bill Cook for the Rangers, 48 games, 33 goals, 14 assists for 47 points. Hooley Smith for the Maroons, 43 games, 11 goals, 33 assists, 44 points. Dave Trottier for the Montreal Maroons, 48 games, 26 goals, 18 assists, 44 points. George Hainsworth, still putting up really good numbers for the Montreal Canadiens in net. Record of 25, 15, and 7, 2.19 goals against average. John Ross Roach for the Rangers, 23, 17, and 8, 2.23 goals against average. Lauren Chabot for Toronto, 21, 16, and 6, 2.36 goals against average. Alex Connell for Detroit, 18, 20, and 10, 2.13 goals against average for Connell. Charlie Gardner for Chicago, 18, 18, and 1, 1.85 goals against average. So again, while we saw the scoring go up for that 1 year, it definitely dropped in subsequent seasons. So we get to the playoffs. They still have this really weird system for the playoffs and the Stanley Cup Final and the semifinal between the top 2 teams from each or the top team from each division. Those are the only ones that are best out of 5. All the rest of the series are decided by total goals still. And it's 2 games, total goal series. So in the quarterfinals, Chicago beats Toronto in the first game 1-0, but Toronto wins the second game 6-1. So they win by a score of 6-2 in that series. The Montreal Maroons and Detroit Red Wings 1-1 tie in the first game, and then the Maroons win the next game by a score of 2-0. So it's a 3-1 score in total for the Maroons, meaning 3 of the final 4 teams are American or Canadian teams, which is, the first time that had happened in a while. The semifinals, the Maroons tied Toronto 1 apiece, and then in the second game, it goes to overtime. Toronto wins 3-2 to win the total score by a score of 4-3. On the other side, the semifinal, just a normal best-of-5 setup. The Montreal Canadiens beat the Rangers in the first game 4-3. The second game goes to triple overtime before the Rangers win that one by the same score of 4-3. The New York Rangers win the third game by a score of 1-0, and then the Rangers win the fourth game by a score of 5-2. So the Rangers eliminate Montreal in 4 games, 3 games to 1. Then in the Stanley Cup Final, well, this is where the New York Rangers kind of get hosed. The first game, they lose at home against Toronto 6-4, and then in the second game, it's played in Boston, and Toronto beats the Rangers 6-2 in Boston. Why? Well, the Circus is in town, and the Circus has started bumping the Rangers out of their playoff home. This is one of those things that we still talk about this now, where building availability can be an issue in the playoffs because you don't always know when you're going to be playing. And in this case, Madison Square Garden, the Circus is a really lucrative business, and so yeah, that's going to get precedence. And so hockey game, National Hockey League, we got the Circus that weekend. So the first 2 games in New York, one of them's in Boston. They lose both. They go to Toronto for game 3. The Leafs win that one 6-4. They sweep the Stanley Cup Final and win a Stanley Cup for Toronto over the New York Rangers. But absolutely baffling. I cannot imagine that now. I see people complaining about how there's so many days off in these Stanley Cup playoffs, but a lot of the time there is a concert, there's something going on. Just imagine if they went to a third-party site. If they said, all right, so we can't play in Vancouver tonight. Let's just bump it over to Calgary. We'll play the game there. That wouldn't go well. I know New York and Boston are way closer than Vancouver and Calgary, but still, I don't think Ranger fans would be happy about having to drive to Boston to watch a Stanley Cup Final game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then they lose. So, anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.